The Brewers continuing to get things done during a challenging road trip leading into the All-Star break. Even though they're not playing the best baseball, the wins still continuing to pile up. They're just coming off of a very successful long series in St. Louis. Then on the flip side, some injury concerns with Brandon Woodruff and Kyle Harrison and David Hamilton, all to varying degrees. Back on the positive side, though, Luis Lara is in the big leagues. He got his call up this week and had a productive debut. So a little bit of yo-yoing, some back and forth here between some good and some bad on this week's edition of the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Also, it is draft weekend coming up, so a big weekend for my co-host, Spencer Michaelis. We'll dive into that pretty quickly, but I'm going to ask how you're doing. I think I already know the answer to this one. I got a text this morning from Spencer saying that he was overwhelmed between work and draft stuff and all of this. So one of your busiest weekends of the year coming up here, I would imagine.
It sure is. It's like 2 full days of work basically, but it's just baseball, so I'd rather work like that than my normal work day. But yeah, I am very much looking forward to this weekend. It's going to be super busy, but it's also a ton of fun. I had a lot of fun covering it last year, and last year I had to take a day off of work to do so. So I know not everyone's a huge fan of the Saturday, Sunday setup, but I am appreciative that I can just do it without having to use any vacation time to follow the draft. So that's ideal for me. And it's going to be a weird setup. The TV situation is going to be very weird. So there's like 3 different broadcasts all on day one. It's, of course, in anything MLB is doing, they're going to make it complicated on the broadcasting side of things. But otherwise, very much looking forward to it. Going to be a weird draft. Already recorded, obviously, with Jamie Cameron, a draft preview that I'm assuming we're going to toss at the end of this episode, Jack? Or
no, they're going to hear it now. Let's play it now.
All right, right now. But yeah, that went really well. I think everyone will enjoy that quite a bit, and I think you'll get a lot of detail from Jamie that I don't think that you'll get too many other places, especially Brewers specific. So, yeah, definitely excited for this weekend, but also extremely busy trying to put my own draft board together because for some reason I thought that was a good thing for me to undertake in the middle of this, everything else I have going on.
Given what's coming up this weekend, we did get a lot of draft questions from people. Those are not going to be directly included during this portion because Spencer, with all of his amazing foresight, pretty much answered all of those questions with Jamie during this 45-minute segment here on the draft. So without further ado, we're going to go right into it. And if this is not what you came here for this week, you can skip ahead about 45 minutes or so, and that's probably going to get you toward the end of it before we start talking about big league content. But without further ado, as I said, Spencer Michaelis and Jamie Cameron previewing the 2026 MLB Draft. So we have reached Spencer's favorite time of the year. I shouldn't just say Spencer's favorite time of the year because I'm sure this is our guest's favorite time of the year. Kind of a lot of prep work that I know both of you guys do leading up to this weekend. The MLB Draft, it's going to be this coming weekend, so we'd be overlooking things a little bit here if we didn't take a minute to do some more draft-centric coverage. For that, as we have in the past, we brought in Jamie Cameron, one of Diamond Centric's finest when it comes to knowing all about prospects on a broader level and covering the draft. So as a reminder, you can follow his stuff at a couple of different places. You can find his Patreon, Limestone Pipeline, the podcast destination, the show, some really good prospect talk that happens on that pod. And then, as I mentioned, he does some writing, prospect-centric writing for Diamond Centric, which is our larger parent company that owns Brewer Fanatic, Twins Daily, all of these different sites. And he does some stuff for Just Baseball as well. So, Jamie, I know you joined us in the past. We must not have scared you off too badly if you were willing to come back. But thank you for taking a few minutes here to kind of help us break this down here and give us a little preview for the weekend.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Always a pleasure. Always fun to talk different organizations and get out of my own little Twins-centric hellscape for a few hours. So I'm excited to talk Brewers.
Good. I already said to you guys that the way we were going to do this was I was just going to bug out because out of the 3 of us, I'm probably fish out of water a little bit here. So, Spencer, I know that you have all kinds of notes and you guys kind of chatted ahead of time on all the stuff that you want to go over. So for this portion of the pod, I'm just going to kind of hang out in the background here, and I'm going to let you two go at it. So any draft coverage that you want to kind of go through for people and some things that you want to preview, take it away.
All right. That's dangerous when you give me free will to talk drafts or prospects. But yeah, excited to get into this, Jamie. Thanks again for joining us. But
Sure.
just to kind of kick things off here, for our listeners who I'm sure many aren't fully familiar with the whole draft and everything that goes on there, because there is quite a bit to it in terms of money and draft slots and everything else. Can you kind of give a overall explanation of how the bonus pool system works, and then kind of wrap it up with some of the Brewers specific numbers this year, maybe some of the picks, how the bonus pool is shaking out for the Brewers specifically?
Yeah, for sure. So the way the MLB draft is organized is MLB releases what they call recommended slot values for every pick in the first 10 rounds. And the way that you come to an understanding of your kind of chosen team's bonus pool is you simply add up the recommended slot values for every one of a given organization's picks within the first 10 rounds. And that constitutes your bonus pool. Now, how you spend that money is completely up to you. And as I'm sure we'll get into, the Brewers tend to be one of the most flexible organizations in terms of how they manage and spend their money. But you can pay under slot for a particular prospect, over slot. But that's essentially how rounds 1 through 10 work. For rounds 11 through 20, it's a little bit of a different system. You can sign any player for up to $150,000 kind of penalty free. You can still sign prospects for more, but anything over 150,000 is going to come out of your bonus pool. So if you sign a 13th round prospect for $200,000, for example, 50,000 will come out of your bonus pool. So, ordinarily, the Brewers are usually in a pretty solid position with their bonus pool, and it's not like that this year. When you reached out, Spencer, I haven't been super in the weeds on the Brewers pool yet, but you guys are right down at the bottom here, which is unusual. So the Brewers, as like a revenue receiving team, also receive a kind of bonus pick on a rotating basis every year. That's couched in what's called either comp round A or comp round B. Those alternate every year. This year it's in comp round B, I believe, which is, and I think they potentially traded that one away, right, as part of the a trade with the Red Sox. So the upshot for the Brewers is, I want to say they have the 24th or 25th largest bonus pool. So right down at the bottom, it's a total of $8,042,900. A large amount of that money is really going to be bound up in their first couple of picks. Their first pick towards the back of the first round is worth just under $3.7 million. So they find themselves in a little bit of an unusual position. And I think for me, as like a Brewers appreciator, not necessarily a Brewers fan, that only adds intrigue because they always do a really creative job of kind of spending their money. And then I think the last thing that we should mention is every team has the ability to spend up to 5% over their bonus pool in what's known as an overage. And the only penalty you pay on that money is 100% tax. And the Brewers wisely choose to invest almost all of those dollars. That's really one of the most, outside of the international market, the amateur draft is really about as efficient of a means as possible of getting talent into your organization. So weird situation in 2026 with the Brewers being kind of close to the back of the pile in terms of pool, but that's the price you pay for making it to the NL Championship Series. And I'm sure that's an outcome 100% of Brewers fans would take year over year.
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of the price to pay for success, and then also for trading a pick away as well, like you mentioned. I think Brewer fans are probably pretty happy with Kyle Harrison and Shane Drowan and even David Hamilton to this point. So I think they're probably feeling all right about losing that slot value and the pick in that spot. But yeah, the last time this happened, the last time they were even close to this type of money was 2022. Eric Brown Jr. was the first round pick, but then they went out and they got Jacob Misiorowski in the second round. So just to give Brewer fans an idea that there is still a way to bring in some pretty big talent here. This isn't something where they are at near the bottom. The Dodgers are very regularly near the bottom too, and still bring in quite a bit of talent through the draft. So it'll look different than what we've seen in the past for the Brewers. They won't most likely have as much room to maneuver in those 11 through 20 rounds that you mentioned, where they are very aggressive, going over the 150,000 and signing high school picks. And it'll probably not look quite the same. Just to kind of circle back to 2022, though, that they drafted Luke Adams in the 11 through 20 rounds. So, like, they can still go out and get guys. They're very, very good at kind of scouting in the weeds. They find some of the under-the-radar guys that other teams are either missing on or just not quite as willing to go out and pay for or use a pick on. But it will be different. It's going to look different than what we've seen in the past. So, speaking of this specific draft, though, Jamie, could you kind of give us an overall rundown and impression of the draft, some of the strengths of the draft, maybe some weaknesses, and just like the overarching look at the draft?
Yeah, for sure. So, I always think when we talk about like a draft class overall, like we tend to not be specific about what we're discussing when we're discussing strengths and weaknesses. And we have to kind of couch the conversation as like, what does the impact talent look like at the very top of the first round? And that's not really relevant to the Brewers this year. So, there is kind of a three prospects right at the top who are considered really high impact players, in Rock Chalowski, Grady Emerson, and Von Lackey, two shortstops and a catcher out of Georgia Tech. I think it's also fair to say in general that maybe this class doesn't quite look as rosy now that we're at the end of the cycle to what it did at the beginning. And I say that particularly in reference to both the college hitting and the prep hitting demographics. I think both of those, you could find examples of guys who came into the cycle with the industry had kind of really high hopes for them. Justin LeBron's a great example on the college side of a guy who was kind of in the top three conversation and who didn't really hit a lick during SEC play. Or Tyler Spangler on the prep side, a guy who basically missed his entire prep season. And there's kind of a litany of guys like that, where there's just a little bit more uncertainty around those particular demographics. I'll say that I really like the depth in this class. And so, when I say that, I'm usually going through the end of day one, the beginning of day two, which this year is like picks like 135 through 150. I think there's a lot of really good talent all the way through there, and that suits a team like the Brewers, who both usually have a solid number of picks, but also, as you alluded to, Spencer, do a really good job of in the weeds scouting, finding unique guys, finding underappreciated guys, finding cold weather guys, finding JUCO guys, all the things that the Brewers do so well. And then in terms of other demographics and strengths, I mean, if you're into prep pitching, I think this is the draft for you. This is just my opinion. I think, in the like 6 cycles I've been doing this in the weeds, this is the best prep pitching crop that I've come across. It's certainly the most arm talent I've ever seen in high school pitching in a particular class. I mean, there's like 10, 12, 15 guys who throw upwards of 100 just in the high school ranks. If history is our teacher, the Brewers will lean into that at some point anyway. So I would call out prep pitching as probably the strongest demographic overall.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much in line with how I've been looking at it. And like you said, it has been interesting if you just look back at like the initial mock drafts that everyone does. When this draft ends, there will be a 2027 mock draft out 2 days later. Yeah. But yeah, if you look back at those, like you mentioned, Justin LeBron was seen as like almost a no doubt top 3 guy. Von Lackey was seen as a first round guy probably, but not nearly as high of a pick as he's going to end up going. So it is interesting to kind of follow the cycle. Obviously, there's going to be ups and downs with guys, and some guys are like LeBron going to show some warts in their game that you were hoping were going to get cleaned up, and instead they kind of trended the opposite way. But when we got to this point in the draft, I actually do think that what you talked about is a big part of why I feel pretty good about, despite the Brewers having a small bonus pool, like it is kind of the type of draft that you would almost be okay with that being the case, because you don't necessarily worry about missing out on top end talent in that first round. You can just view it as like another pick, where we should mention the 80% of the slot value that is normally going to be, it's 80%, correct? 80% if you got a physical at the combine. Is that what
I want to say it's 75, but
it might be 75. Yeah.
75, 80, right around there.
Yeah. So either way, like there is a minimum for people who went to the combine and got a physical done for every team. So there is a part where you can't go super far under slot early on, but they can still save some money and probably feel pretty good about where they're going the rest of the draft and open up a little bit more savings than they maybe would in the past, even though it's kind of been the Brewers' MO either way. But yeah, I mean, we can jump right into more Brewer specific here. Who are maybe some of, in your eyes, the most ideal, probably realistic names that could fall to the Brewers at 25? Not necessarily fall, but just in that range, who are you looking at as maybe some ideal fits or realistic names for them?
Yeah. It's funny. So first of all, quick caveat before we jump into this. I'm expecting absolute chaos after about pick 15. I really think, and I'm looking at my board at the moment, which some folks may know is kind of a consensus board that tries to thread together as many major industry boards as we can get. And so that's the board I'll kind of be referencing, is essentially like a consensus ranking of these top guys. I'm expecting it to be the least accurate it's ever been. And for me, that's really fun. That's exciting. I think after about pick 15, it's just going to be an absolute mess. So that's a major caveat before we get into this Brewers round one conversation. I think the other thing I would say is I try really hard when I saw this question to not fall victim to just assuming that the Brewers are going to do something similar to what they've done with their first pick the last few years, right? So I think it's a trap to say, well, we expect them to take a college corner guy who's a hit power threat because they took Wilkin, because they took Blake Burke, because they took Andrew Fisher. Like maybe, but I see a lot of, in my opinion, a little bit lazy Ace Reese to the Brewers. Like that's a shoo-in. But they also took Braylon Payne, who was on nobody's radar. And so I tried just more to say, okay, who are the actual prospects I like in this range, as opposed to trying to identify a kind of Brewers phenotype. But there are a couple of there's one college bat in particular that if he fell to 25, I would be interested in, and that's AJ Gracia. I think I currently have him 17 on the board. He's trickled down a little bit just because I think some of the supplementary tools are a little bit less loud, but he has a really strong track record of college performance, a legit hit power threat, in my opinion. I really don't think there are many. I think he'll be off the board by the time the Brewers come around, but he's a name that interests me. Another prospect I like a ton, who I do see as a little bit more Brewers-ish, is Trevor Condon. He's a prep hitter out of Georgia who I like a ton. He's the kind of kid who, if he's not playing for your team, you absolutely hate him. Like, he plays with his hair on fire. He's really energetic. He's really confident. You might describe him as cocky. He's a hit tool first outfielder with a little bit of like a kind of Pete Crow Armstrong, like starter kit type skill set. I like him a ton. And that's a little bit of a Brewers type for me, right? As someone who can certainly get the bat on the ball, and there are some loud supplementary tools, whether that's speed, whether that's defense, whether that's both. He fits the bill for me. Just where the Brewers are picking, and I know this hasn't been the move in the past few first rounds, there's a really interesting cluster of college arms where the Brewers are picking. You've got Cole Carlone, a lefty out of Arizona State, Kay Townsend, a righty out of Ole Miss, Hunter Dietz, a big lefty out of Arkansas, and then Tegan Kuntz, all within a 5-pick range. And there's aspects of all of those guys' games that I like a ton, whether that's size, release traits, arsenal, projectability, some combination of all of those. So those are all guys, earlier in the cycle, I might have said Derek Curiel, but he snuck up the board so much now. I have him number 10 by consensus, but I think he's another Brewersy guy that may end up being, maybe a St. Louis Cardinal or something like that. But those are some names around where the Brewers are picking that I like a ton.
Yeah, I think that group of pitchers does definitely stand out. And as you mentioned, it hasn't been their MO. They haven't picked the first round pitcher at all since Ethan Small. But it is a pretty interesting group with a lot of guys who fit kind of what the Brewers like in arms, and they have traits that they're going to like. And I mean, I've been seeing Cameron Flukie starting to fall into that range in mocks, and like that's a guy who has definitely kind of fallen down the board, but you might be buying low on a guy who missed a lot of time this year with a lot of really interesting traits. It wouldn't shock me, and I normally would be kind of surprised if they went that route, but I do think that this could be a year where we see them at least show some legitimate interest in those guys and kind of search out the right fit. Trevor Condon is absolutely a Brewers type. That is a very good call out there. He's a guy I've been looking at. I've been seeing him kind of climb boards too, and maybe get to the point where he might not make it to 25, but still, like, that's a guy who, if Pat Murphy is still managing when a high school guy comes around from the draft, I'm sure he would be a favorite of Murph's. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good list, and we don't have to go super in depth on this because there's probably some guys in that mix already. But are there any specific under slot types that you think would maybe be a good fit at 25 for the Brewers?
Yeah, so it really depends how far down the board and how weird you want to get. I think so. There's one college guy who makes a little bit of sense to me, and then I think we can potentially call out a couple of prep hitters that I have my eye on as prospects I like too. So this is maybe a weird one, but a college prospect who I think you get under slot is an outfielder out of Louisville named Zion Rose. He was a really highly thought of catching prospect out of IMG Academy back in the day. And what he's turned into is this just kind of incredible athlete who is a little bit of a misfit in a corner outfield spot, has a really strong bat to ball track record and hits the ball really hard, but he has a little bit of a ground ball problem and lacks a little bit of feel for launch. That's a kind of guy who, and this is a compliment to the Brewers, just player development in general, I can see the Brewers saying, okay, if this guy can unlock a little bit of loft in his swing, suddenly he's like a 55-55 hit power threat, and we've got someone who's way more valuable than 25th overall in the class. If you want to get weirder and go further down the board, I think there's a number of prep prospects that I think are really interesting. If you want to go quite a bit further down, Rocco Maniscalco is a guy who I love. I currently have him 68th. And that's after a little bit of a combine bump. He is going to be, I want to say, the youngest prospect in the draft. He's a reclass. He'll be 17 years and 2 months old. Switch hitting shortstop. He's drawn kind of Eli Willits comparisons out of Alabama. He's like a no doubt lock to stick at shortstop. He was clocking absolute dimes across the infield at the combine at like 98 miles an hour. He did not have a good year at the plate. But as a mostly 16-year-old, that's something I can pretty easily get past. So he would be a prep hitter. And then there's a number of other prep hitter guys who we can potentially dig into later. Cole Prosack is a guy I've seen linked to the Brewers quite a bit, hit tool forward prospect, but he's going to be older, 19 on draft day. And then Aiden Ruiz is another guy, also older for the class, 19 on draft day, but probably the best defensive high school shortstop in the class. Cold weather guy out of the Stony Brook High School in New York, and just like a pain of an at bat for any pitcher. And he's another guy who I just see, he just like takes quality at bats, knows the strike zone really well, can make every play in the infield. And if he wasn't 19, I would absolutely put him on the list. But those are some potential underslot guys that I would have my eyes on if I was a Brewers fan.
Yeah, Maniscalco has definitely been standing out to me as a guy who could fit that it's not the exact same as Braylon Payne, and it's obviously a shortstop versus an outfielder, but kind of a late blooming bat. You have pretty good athlete, but especially the defense at short and the arm. The combine stuff was very impressive, and he did show a little bit more pop than I think people were expecting him to at the combine as well. So he is definitely one that has stood out to me. I've seen Prosek mentioned a lot. He's actually the third base coach for the Brewers, Matt Erickson, his nephew. So there's some family ties there. I could see a connection there. I have seen Ruiz tied a little bit. That one I'm not as big a fan of, mostly for the reason you mentioned, the 19-year-old part. I can deal with Maniscalco not having as much with the bat right now, partially because he is 17, and I think it's him and Grindlinger will be like the two youngest dudes in the class pretty much. I can deal with that for a guy like that who's that age, but it is harder for me with Ruiz at 19. But as an underslot guy, it wouldn't be the worst thing. I'd probably feel better about it in round 2 and still would probably want it to be around slot or below for a guy like that. But of the players projected to go around that 25th pick, is there anyone specifically that you are lower on? Any players you'd be, if you were in charge of a team, kind of looking to avoid at that spot that have been rumored in that range?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So actually Ace Reese is on my list here. Look, I mean, like, college production is inarguable. Like, if you produce the kind of numbers he did in the SEC, that's super impressive. He absolutely has a track record. But if we stack up his kind of bat to ball numbers, apples to apples, with those corner hit power profile bats that the Brewers have taken, and we should point out that, like, not all of them have worked out, right? Brock Wilken, possibly not a big leaguer at this point. Burke looks great. Fisher, I mean, the power, not questioning that, but there's also some contact and some strikeout woes. Ace Reese's bat to ball numbers are not as good in college as those guys, and so that gives me a little bit of pause. On the pitching side, Mason Edwards is a guy that I've struggled to get on board with as much as everybody else. Smaller frame dude, less velocity, still a lot of walks, and the track record in the Big Ten, despite the kind of dominance there, he just looks pretty ordinary to me in postseason play, and that's probably me overemphasizing a pretty small sample size. But if I look around at guys like Dietz and Carlone and Townsend, I'm just like way more drawn to their repertoires. For most of them, their kind of size, stuff, profiles, all that good stuff. And then my last one would be Eric Becker, shortstop out of Virginia. He just represents a kind of sub genre of prospect that I have a really hard time with, which is the hit tool forward guy who doesn't really have any outstanding supplementary tools to lean on. And it does sound like Becker was dealing with an injury and trying to play through an injury this year. But to me, drafting a prospect like him, where he's so reliant on kind of bat to ball skills and hit tool, creates such a narrow path to success. And I'm looking for ways to broaden the path to success as much as possible with guys from the outset. So I can't get on board with a guy like that. Honestly, even at the back end of the first round, he's off my board. Honestly, Becker. I don't know why. I'm maybe being a little bit too much of a hater, but he doesn't appeal to me at all.
Yeah, I keep seeing Ace Reese tied to the Brewers, and I cannot get on board with it. It is not. That is a pick that I will probably be pretty hard on if they make it in the moment. Like you mentioned, I mean, the chase rate, I think, is like 8% higher than Fisher's was in college. The whiff rate's a couple percentage points higher, and Fisher is showing pretty big whiff issues in pro ball. Reese still, he gets to the power. He does pull it in the air a decent amount, but not quite at the level that Fisher did either. So he's fine. I don't think it's like a terrible prospect, but it's not one that I think the Brewers necessarily would be a great fit for. I could see some other organizations doing better with him, and he would not be a guy that I'd be very on board with. Yeah, Edwards gives me some of the Robert Gasser type vibes, which is fine, but that's not super high upside for a guy in the first round. And I could easily see it's not the same type of profile by any means. But I could easily see that being Ethan Small like, where it's just like, yeah, he turned out to be, he made it to the big leagues, but there's not really a bunch there, and that's not how I want to use a first round pick.
Yep.
And then, yeah, Becker is one I haven't looked into a ton, but everything I've seen, I've just kind of been like, yeah, he's fine. Like, I don't see, again, it's just not a first round type pick to me, and not somebody that I'd be like, oh yeah, under slot, it makes some sense. I just don't view him as that type of player. So I'm very much with you on those guys. So we kind of mentioned it already, but the Brewers are pretty usually almost every year going to be taking a prep arm in like that second round competitive balance, which they don't have this year, or third round. They often take two. It'll be a little bit more difficult this year, given the limited number of picks and money to play with. But who are some guys maybe in that second, third round range, some prep arms? You mentioned it's a good class, so you don't have to go through all the guys you like, but some names that maybe fit. You mentioned Brewers obviously go cold weather a lot, and they like the Northeast, and there are some names out there that I think are interesting. So I'm curious who you're looking at here.
Yeah, so I picked out 5, and like that might sound like a lot, but it could have been 10, 12, 15. Okay, so we'll just take these guys in order. A guy who I think is fun and interesting is Joseph Contreras. That's the son of Jose Contreras. There's a Vandy commit there, which is maybe a little bit challenging, but he a lot of people have seen him because he pitched in the WBC for Brazil against USA, Team USA rather. I mean, just like really legit arm talent, 94, 97 up to 100, throws a fork ball, a younger 18, which is super interesting. So he's really fun. I think he will also be expensive. Probably my favorite prep pitcher in the class is Caden McCarthy. He's going to be 17 on draft day. I think it's fair to call him a little undersized. 6 foot, listed at 6 foot 190. He's out of Vermont, which is weird in a fun way. In a way that I think and hope that people have seen a little bit less of him. But he's just like he is an elite mover. He's an amazing athlete. Fastball's already plus. That pitch is up to 99, sits 94, 96. Knuckle curve and slider for the breakers. A solid changeup. Enough strikes. I love Caden McCarthy. I want him on my squad, so hands off, A couple more I would call out. Cooper Harris is a prep arm I'm fond of out of Texas, Flower Mound High School. He's someone I would kind of characterize as kind of an all-rounder of a prep arm. And we talked about this a little bit with the hitters, right? Of like, there are a number of paths to success. He's got solid size. He already has a solid 4-pitch mix. That might not be one outstanding plus pitch, but you have a chance for a bunch of 50s or 55s. He throws a lot of strikes. I like Harris a bunch. Ethan Waxman is a guy who really popped at the combine for people. Colorado's not usually like a hotbed of baseball or pitching talent, but he's a Wake commit, which is a solid giveaway. But he was up to 100 at the combine, and his fastball was like, he was spinning his fastball like 2,700 RPMs, and then he would follow it up with like a 85 mile per hour breaker at 3,000. And he's listed at 6'5", 225. I think he's pretty raw. Pardon me. He would be like much more of like a slow burner type. Like I think you would possibly see a couple of years in the complex league or moving slower through the levels than some of these other guys. But Waxman is someone who's interesting. And then if you want to get really like further down the board, Lucas Naraki is someone I think is really interesting, and Brewersy to me. Another undersized guy, left-handed pitcher out of Texas, listed at 5'11", 195. He like might be a reliever, but I bet the Brewers would find a way to potentially not have him be a reliever. He's got really interesting release traits, like good extension, low release height, deception on the delivery, mid-90s fastball, and then it's maybe the best prep slider in the class. That's a sweeper at like 3,300 RPMs. It's just absolutely unhittable. That's like 1A and 1B is like Naraki and Carlone's slider for me in this class, and in whatever order you want to argue them. So those would be some of my fun fits for the Brewers, I think. How about you?
Yeah, I promise we have not talked about this for the listeners beforehand, but this is like Cooper Harris is the only one of that list that I wouldn't have had on my own, and that's not even anything against him. He's just not quite as high for me, but Naraki is like a guy I've been working on doing like my own board that I'm going to put out just because it's something I've always kind of done, and now I'm like, okay, I might as well just do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have him like a top 50 guy in this class. I think that is a really, really good arm that specifically for the Brewers fits a ton. And Caden McCarthy is the exact same. Yeah, you mentioned like Colorado is not normally a big, like Vermont is not a place you're seeing.
For real.
You're seeing many high schoolers out of, but the fact that he went to the combine, he had a good showing at the combine in some live ABs and stuff. Yeah, he gives me like huge upside that the Brewers would do very well with. And the Twins like these types of arms too. So yeah, you're right. It wouldn't shock me if the Twins took him before the Brewers got the shot too. But those are the two from that group that I'm very high on. I think they would both be big time fits. And Naraki would kind of remind me, it's a different level arm, but it would remind me a bit of the Frank Chiron pick.
Oh yeah.
A guy who was like pretty far down the board for a lot of people, but flying up it at the end, lefty with a little bit smaller, not the biggest guy in the world, but really good traits on almost all his pitches. And just, I think he fits a lot of what the Brewers do. So would not shock me at all if they went that route. Moving kind of a little bit further into the draft, and this is where we get into really, really nerdy stuff, I think. But any players on kind of the day 2 range that feel like fits for the Brewers in your eyes? Some guys that, maybe some college guys, senior signs, whatever it might be. Some guys who maybe fit what the Brewers do who are further down the board.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting college pitching, I think, outside of the top 4 or 5 rounds that I'm interested in. And, the reality is probably a lot of that is going to get pushed up as we get towards the back end of day 1. But a couple of arms I would call out. Trey Beard, a lefty out of Florida State. He's 137 overall. He can spin it. He has a little bit of a mediocre, he has an interesting fastball too. His production fell off a little bit at the end of this year. He was ranked much higher on the board. Another lefty out of West Virginia, Maxiel, big framed guy who I find interesting. I've picked guys I'm realizing as I'm going through my list now that are large humans. Carson Jasa out of Nebraska is another interesting player. He rips a really interesting slider. His fastball shape is a little generic, but he's also super raw. Like, he just hasn't pitched a ton. I think they told him as a freshman, like, you're not allowed to pitch in practice because we're worried about you injuring people because you're such a hot mess. But that's the kind of project you want on like day 2 with an organization that knows what they're doing with pitching. And then a guy who I really think fits the Brewers quite nicely would be Duncan Marston. He is a righty who is pretty highly thought of as a prep player. I believe he's a draft eligible sophomore out of Wake Forest, 6'3", 195. The arm talent's really good. He's been up to 99 with the fastball. He can really spin the ball too. He had a problem getting lit up by lefties this season in college ball. He really dominated righties. So he's just like a solid Brewersy project with, let's put it this way. The arm talent and the production haven't really met up yet. And that's the kind of formula I'm interested in if I'm a team who knows what they're doing with pitchers. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you can find a guy who maybe, like you said, he has the arm talent, he's got the ability to either spin the ball or just mix a bunch of different pitches. It just reminds me of like the Jaron DeBerry pick a couple of years ago, which is turning out really well. And then you get further down the board, you get him for a little bit under slot. Even as you get deeper, you save some money. Tate Keener is another guy who was kind of like that a few years ago. Like, guys who maybe in Keener's case actually made a bit of a jump his final season at Louisville, but in a lot of cases, guys who maybe took a step back, but you had seen flashes of it. I mean, not to cross sports, but like the Packers love to do that with their picks. They love to take a guy who in like the 5th round, had a really good junior year, didn't enter the draft, and then senior year didn't go super well. And then you get a Dontavian Wicks, who's really solid for the Packers for a while. So I think the Brewers kind of look at things that way, which it definitely makes some sense. But just to kind of take it beyond the Brewers specifically, who are maybe your guys in this draft? And it can be top of the draft. It can be guys who in the middle rounds you just have kind of a prospect crush on as a draft guy. But maybe some guys that you would say you like quite a bit more than the most, other than we've already mentioned some of them, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll try not to be too repetitive. I mean, at the very top of the board, this is going to sound obvious. I'm really intrigued by Von Lackey as a prospect, possibly because my favorite team might well end up with him as a member of the org by the end of the weekend, but also just like the rarity of that catching profile, I think is pretty unusual, right? We haven't kind of seen a college catcher like that probably since Adley Rutschman, where we feel confident about the defense, the athleticism, and the hitting really came together his junior year. Condon is a guy that we talked about already. If we go down a little further, Logan Hughes is a college bat whose production I like a ton. The supplementary tools are fringy there, so he really has to hit, but he's in the like 30 to 40 range on most boards. A college arm I would mention is Jack Radell. He's in the kind of 40 to 50 range. I like him a ton. It's a lot of strikes. It's a solid 4-pitch mix. The velo's there. He's like a big dude too. And he pitched at Notre Dame for 3 years and got better every year against good competition. And to me, that's just a like, what is left there? And it's not a knock on Notre Dame, but like, what's the next step for him in making his arsenal more interesting, adding a tick consistently to the fastball and the other pitches, whatever that might be. So he's a really interesting guy. My pre-cycle draft crush, who's fallen quite a bit on a lot of boards, is Blake Bowen, who's a prep righty out of California, who's kind of built like Mike Trout. And he's just your like tools package of like bazooka arm, incredibly fast runner, really hasn't focused that much on baseball because he played football and all of the other things. So I'm just interested by that athletic talent. Taylor Rabe out of Ole Miss is a guy who's zoomed up boards who I'd expect him to go in the top 30. I think he's 52nd by consensus at the moment. And then let's see, I guess one last guy more towards a kind of 90 to 100 range, at least overall, is Tyson LeBlanc. He's a really fun bat, and there's not a ton of interesting college shortstops in the like 30 to 60 range in this draft, but at the back of the kind of top 100, you have two guys in D. Kennedy out of Kansas State and Tyson LeBlanc out of Kansas, who are both like college performers, who I think might get pushed up the board a little bit on draft day, who I think are interesting.
Yeah. I am very high on Radell. It's not exactly the same, but he does give me a lot of the Brandon Woodruff type vibe when I watch him because of the big body, good pitch mix, bunch of strikes, just kind of goes at guys. He's somebody I've looked at as like, I could see them at 25 being interested in him as an underslot guy. Like I could see that being the case there. LeBlanc is another one that I've been pretty high on. Everything I look at with him, I love the swing. I think there's production. I think there's pop. I think there's a hit tool. I think he can handle short. That's a pretty interesting profile for me too. I want to throw a couple names at you.
Yeah.
One of them's a Wisconsin native originally, Jake Schaffner. I am a very big fan of Schaffner. Everything I've looked at with him now, I think he's a second baseman. But he gives me a ton of like pre-breakout Bryce Terang vibes, and with like I think a better hit tool in general at the plate. But I think there's more pop than he's necessarily shown in college already. Really good bat to ball, very fast. Like I think I've seen some grades. I think he's probably a plus runner when I look at him. The glove is pretty good. I don't know if the arm can handle the other side of the left side, maybe third in a pinch, but I think probably second base is where he ends up. What are your thoughts on him? He's a guy that I've kind of looked at as, I think he might be moving up too far, but as a second round guy for the Brewers for a while now.
Yeah, I like Schaffner a lot. He's from Janesville, right?
Yep.
Vegas. Yeah, he's super interesting. I mean, you look at his batted ball profile, and that's some of the best bat to ball skill in college baseball. And you mentioned the impact. He's one of those guys to me who's a bit like Kalen Culpepper on the Twins coming out, where you don't see upper let's put it this way. His 95th percentile exit velocity is not that high, but he barrels the ball so much that he kind of outperforms that lack of real top end exit velos. I also think there's probably, if there's an orc who can help him pull the ball a little bit more consistently, there's something untapped there, but he also makes good swing decisions. Yeah, he's a guy with a ton of floor, and I mean that as like a compliment. I think that's something that you're shooting for with your second or third pick, is a little bit of certainty. So yeah, Schaffner, like him a ton. Did himself plenty of favors in North Carolina's College World Series run.
I know. It's somewhat disappointing for me, unfortunately, because I was already in on him, and then I was like, oh man, he's playing himself too far up the board, isn't he? But
a few guys on that team are going to make themselves plenty of money. Owen Hall is another guy.
Yeah, which good for them for sure. They're way more important than my what I want. But yeah, I think the only other one I'll throw out, and this would be for my next question, one of my picks for it, but we've talked about him before, but Isaac Morton. He has really fallen down the board. He had, well, not really. He's kind of sat where he was preseason, but he had started to move up early in the season. The production kind of went away as the season went on. He is just such an intriguing arm to me. It's a funky arm slot. It is the velo can get up into the upper 90s from there with a ton of run, a ton of sink. One of the filthiest sweepers in all of the draft, probably. Can spin it up over 3,000 RPMs. He can get it up into the upper 80s still with a bunch of glove side run at times. And he added the cutter this year. He added a decent looking changeup at times this year. I think command's definitely a question, but the Brewers drafted him once. If I were making a dart throw this year, I just have a feeling he's going to end up a Brewer again. But kind of what are your thoughts? I know he obviously played at Minnesota, kind of in your neck of the woods. So, yeah, what do you think of Morton?
Yeah, got a lot of love for Isaac Morton. He's from literally 10 minutes down the road for me here. I think the thing I would call out, right, is you mentioned he fell off a little bit towards the end of the season. In 2024 and 2025, he threw a combined 19.1 innings. It's a little bit like Connor Prelip suddenly having a workload. And he threw 60 innings this year. And I think that's something, regardless of overall production, that you want to celebrate, right? He showed he can get through an entire college baseball season for a Minnesota team that looked very promising right from the jump and then fell off horribly during conference play. But he showed the ability to generate swing and miss. He showed more strikes than he had shown previously. And there's just, when you get down to Morton's range in the board, and I'll pull him up here, see 194th overall by consensus at the moment. I would take him quite a bit higher. We talk about finding a unique trait or pitch with guys in this range. And I think he has more than one intriguing kind of asset about his profile. He has velocity. He has the release traits that you mentioned. He can spin the ball. I like Morton a ton. It would be a thrill for me if the Brewers took him, because he's also the kind of prospect where you need prospect and organization to be kind of in synergy. You need the right fit for someone like Morton. If he goes to someone like the Angels, I would be more concerned. So the Brewers clearly kind of valued what he brought to the table before. And I think regardless of how the production looked in 2026, the number one thing you're looking for is, can he get healthy? So or can he stay healthy throughout the season? So I definitely think he's going to be taken. He's going to be drafted. And I don't think he could have a better fit org than the Brewers to kind of maximize what he's got, whether that's remaining a starter or ending up in some kind of high leverage relief type role.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna finish this off with just I'm going to make you throw a dart here. And I'm going to let you throw more than one dart, but you only get one dart for your prediction at pick 25. And then I will let you have any other darts you want for names that you just, like I just did with Isaac Morton, names that you think, I think this guy's going to be a Brewer just for some reason. It doesn't need, we're just having fun with it, but throw out, start with 25 and go from there with whatever you want to do.
Okay, look, 25. I've never felt less good about making a call to it. I'm seriously, because the combination of chaos, college pitchers being the sweet spot in that range that the Brewers haven't really leaned into. I would say, if available, Trevor Condon would be my absolute favorite choice for the Brewers, but I also think there's a solid chance he's going to go in the teens. So I'm going to throw a dart at Cade Townsend, a right-hander out of Ole Miss. I think he's a good fit, interesting repertoire, the type of pitcher that the Brewers, I think, would love to work with. Watch them go down the board and take someone like 80th overall, just to spite me here. And then in terms of other guys who might be a fit for the Brewers, how about, let's see. I got two. There's one other guy I want to mention who I just because it's unusual, not necessarily as a Brewers fit, but if you'll permit me here, Spencer.
Of course.
Will Brick is a guy who I hate prep catchers, and he's maybe the first ever prep catcher who I like a ton. And so I just want him to go to an organization that's going to do right by him, because I think combo of like solid bat to ball, potential for impact, like a starter kit that has a chance to be an above average or even plus defensive catcher. And then he gets kind of rave reviews for his like intangibles, his leadership stuff. Will Brick is a prospect I love. And so that's a weird one that I wanted to call out. How about Trey Ebel for a Brewer? Just maybe that's a little bit cheap, but 17 years old on draft day, shortstop. Brewers just took an Ebel last year. So there'll be kind of familiarity there. He's a guy who has a ton of steam towards the second half of the cycle. Like, he literally went from not top 150 to he's now 83rd by consensus. And I think there's a solid shout he goes in the top 50 or 60. So that's my dark horse. That's maybe a little bit of a cheap shortcut on my part.
I love it. Will, you and I have extremely similar views, it seems, because Will Brick is one of my favorite guys too. I have heard nothing but great things about that dude as just a person. And like you said, the intangible side of things are off the charts for a kid his age. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a legit ceiling on both sides of the ball there as a catcher. Like, he's not a crazy athlete. We're not talking like the Von Lackey, Daniel Jackson speed that we've seen from some catchers in this class, but everything else is there. And he fell down the board a ton this year, it seemed like. Yeah, I could see that fit a lot for the Brewers. It would make a lot of sense. He's a guy early in the class. I even think when I started doing like my mock draft Monday things, I think he was my first round pick, one of the early ones. And I'm with you. I think I even put in the write-up, like, I don't like prep catchers, but this one just is different. So yeah, I like those two. I guess I'll throw out my 25. I just have this feeling that Maniscalco is going to be their pick.
Oh, I love
Maniscalco. So that's where I'm going to go with it. Morton would be one of my other just random dart throws. There's one other name that I don't think he's on boards that I've just heard, and that's Chance Ruby. He is a Wisconsin product high school guy who I think there might be some interest there. So that one would be just a random one for the people listening. But yeah, those would be the ones. I think I think we gave people a lot of information here. So hopefully everyone enjoyed it.
Dude, Wisconsin's got some prep kids who are really high on the board this year too, like Dominic Santorelli, who, by the way, if you want to see it, look, this is going to get weird, but if you want to see a pair of legs, Dominic Santarelli, my goodness, he just does not look, he looks like a professional firefighter. Him and Jace Matisinski out of Hudson, who's an Auburn commit, both guys who are either going to LSU and Auburn respectively, or are going to get paid a decent amount to forego those commitments. So that's a cool local angle, I think, too.
Yeah. I saw Santarelli play at the Rock when I was over there scouting for, looking for D3 players. My eye wasn't on him for a recruiting purpose, but I also had to watch every at bat every time he was up. I mean, that dude, the ball jumps off his bat unlike anybody I've ever seen at that level. And you're not lying about the legs. And then the other part of it is that, like, he moves well.
Yeah, he's a really good athlete.
He's a big dude, but he moves really well. Like, I could see him playing outfield in pro ball and handling it. So he is a fun one. There's been a lot of talent coming out of Wisconsin lately. I think it keeps growing. Baseball keeps growing in, the Midwest and cold weather. And also guys just get more looks now than they used to. Yep. But it's a pretty interesting class. There are a decent amount of legit pro prospects in Wisconsin this year that will get looks at least. And if not, head to college, and then maybe they're Jake Schaffner in a couple of years and they're in the draft after college. But Jack, I don't know if you're still hanging around or if you're planning on ending this for us, but I think before we do go, is there anything, Jamie, that you would like to plug? Anything you'd like to talk? I know you'll be doing the live stream on draft.
Oh, yeah.
Anything you want to talk about there?
Yeah, just thanks guys so much again for having me, Jack. Sorry, and I admire your patience. And we're rocking a stream throughout all of day one, which this year we're starting at 11:30 a.m. on Saturday. And there's like 10 picks, and then they change to a different channel. But Spencer's gonna come join us on that and talk Brewers day one picks. So if you're a Brewers fan, we try and keep that as general as possible, even though there is a little bit of a Twins angle there, and you'll get a good overview of basically every day one pick from 1 through 135. So Destination the Show YouTube page, and we'll be tweeting that out and sharing that throughout. So come join us. We'd love to have folks on board. It'll be fun.
Sounds like you guys are going to have your work cut out for you over the weekend. That's good stuff, though. Everybody who's interested in that should definitely follow not only Jamie, follow Spencer too. Those guys are going to be doing some pretty impressive work over the weekend, some stuff that you're probably not going to be able to find a whole lot of other places, especially if you're looking at like Brewers, Twins, that kind of stuff for the draft. But thanks for joining us, Jamie. Good stuff that you guys went through. Don't apologize for testing patience or anything. It's good stuff, and I think a lot of people like hearing about this. That's why we do it. So definitely appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight.
Yeah, happy to, guys. Thanks for having me. Take it easy.
All right. Good stuff from Spencer and Jamie there. Now we can actually get to the real portion of the show where we talk about the Milwaukee Brewers at the big league level. I had to throw that in there. I know this is what people want, so it's good content anyway. But because we took some time on the draft, we're going to maybe shorten things up a little bit here this week. There was a lot that went on. The injury section is pretty exhaustive here this week, and there's a lot to talk about on that front in addition to what happened on the field. So without further ado, we're going to just start with some housekeeping items. Like I said, it's a little bit of a longer list, and there's a little more to dive into. So obviously the big one is going to be what happened to Brandon Woodruff in Arizona. Basically, the same thing that happened on the surface, at least, the last time that he pitched against the Arizona Diamondbacks at home. He did get through a couple of innings in this one, but by the time that they got toward the middle of the game and he was a couple innings in, the velocity started dropping. It already started dropping his second to last half inning, and then he came back out, and it really just was not there for him. So the velo dropped to about, it wasn't quite sitting 84, 85 like it was the last time he pitched against the Diamondbacks, but it was plummeting toward that. First, it was some 88s, and it was some 87s. There were a couple 85s in there. And as was the case last time, all of a sudden you started flipping in a bunch of change-ups, and those got down to like 76 miles an hour or 74 miles an hour, whatever the last one was. The Brewers saw a grimace from him on the last changeup that he threw. He struck out 3 guys in a row because that just seems to be how things go when he's at his absolute worst stuff-wise. But the Brewers did not have a ton of comment immediately after that. Basically, what Pat Murphy said was they got to find a way to build a strategy on how to deal with this, was the quote that Murphy gave post-game. He did also mention that the initial read that they had was it was kind of the same thing as what happened last time, where that cyst developed around his labrum. That was what he needed to have drained the last time that he experienced this. And he did drop the tidbit that the doctor told them this was going to happen again after it happened the last time, which is some interesting context that was withheld the last time that this happened. Again, I guess I can understand it from their standpoint if they just don't feel a need to say that when it happens the first time, but it just seemed like there was a little more acknowledgement of, yeah, this is a recurring thing, and there's probably a little more going on this time. Brandon Woodruff, post-game talking to media in Arizona, said, quote, "It's one of those things where you hope that it would just hold on until you get to the end of the year, and then you reassess and kind of make some adjustments. But it kind of just popped up on me again here." The way that he was talking in that post-game interview, it just sounded different than the last time that he experienced this. He didn't come out and outright say it, and I wasn't there. I'm consuming this the same way that everybody else is, through the beat reporters who were down in Arizona reporting on this. Kurt Hogue had the whole video of it, of Woodruff talking post-game. There seemed to be this undertone of, yeah, there's an underlying issue here, and everybody has been aware of it, and it was really a situation where you were just trying to do what you could to keep pitching. Surgery was never really mentioned during any of this post-game, but that's just kind of the vibe I got from it. Like, this is a potential surgical issue again, and they're just trying to find a way to make it work for now, because I couldn't blame him if he didn't want to go through that again. So a couple days later, the Brewers sent out their latest injury report to the media, and what they told us was that an MRI revealed a new anterior capsule injury, which is what he had last time and what required surgery last time. He's getting a second opinion from Dr. Meister. He was the one who performed the original surgery, but we got to face the facts here. None of this sounds good. I don't want to speculate too much, but this does sound like I said, like a situation where the shoulder is not in good shape, seemingly, and anytime you hear second opinion, that usually means that there's some kind of procedure on the table. Like I said, this is basically what he had last time, or very similar to it, if there's an injury there and not just a cyst like last time. It kind of feels like he's in a tough spot now where he's going to have to choose between, do I try to give this one more ride to pitch again this year, or are they just going to have to bite the bullet and he either needs another surgery, or if you're looking even further down the line, he's just done if he doesn't want to go through that again? I don't know. There's a lot that lies ahead here, and not too much we can speculate on, but the bottom line is there's a pretty big problem here, it sounds like, and it's not a good situation.
Yeah, it's extremely unfortunate, and just seeing him interacting with the coaches and the trainer on the mound, and the way he left the mound, you mentioned how post-game sounded different than last time. That whole interaction looked a lot different than last time too. Like, and even, in that moment, I'm thinking, well, it's the second time it popped up. It's more frustrating when it keeps popping up, and it's an issue that you have a reoccurring issue with. But I think he kind of knew in that moment something different was going on this time. Just the way he looked, and then, like you said, kind of the post-game talk, and then obviously the MRI revealing what it did is it's not good news. Like you said, I don't want to speculate too much, and it would really, really suck, especially the worst case scenario that you mentioned there, which is that if everything is as bad as it could be here, like, you don't know if a guy's going to want to go through that whole process again, knowing that the same exact outcome could very well be at the end of it, and that it doesn't quite do what it's hoping to do. Like, this is a we talked about it from way back when, and when it first happened, and then during the entirety of his rehab, and when we were trying to always just make sure we cautioned people to be aware, to keep expectations in check for him, because not because he couldn't come back and perform, and he still, again, has outperformed what I think both of us thought he was going to give when he came back. But a lot of it was cautioning, like, how many innings you're going to get out of him in 2025. And then this offseason, we kind of felt like, well, they must feel pretty good about it when they gave him the qualifying offer. And I think everything we cautioned against has kind of come back here. This is a bad injury. It's always been a bad injury. It's a tough one. It is not. Tommy John has always been the pitcher issue that everyone talks about, and it gets the most attention, but it's nowhere near as big of an issue or as likely to cause long-term issues or to not just be solved as any shoulder thing it is, and especially these anterior capsules. Like, these have had some pretty big issues for people and caused pretty big issues for people. And the fact that it's now a multi-time issue this year, the fact that the MRI is revealing another legitimate, we can see it, it's not a cyst, there's an actual injury again. Yeah, I'm just hoping for the best. And honestly, I really want it for Brandon Woodruff's sake. The money, any of that, like, I don't really think the Brewers would have gone out and been able to spend that $22 million or whatever on a ton of talent that would change the course of this season, or a bunch of players on the team right now that would be doing things totally different. So I don't really care that much about a 1-year, $22 million deal for Woodruff and what it meant to the Brewers payroll. But I feel bad for Woodruff. I mean, the guy has been, every young pitcher talks about how much he's helping them, how much he's there for them. He's clearly done everything the Brewers hoped he would do off the field when they brought him back both times. And when he's been on the field, they've gotten very good results. Like, they probably have gotten even better results than they thought they were going to get from him in his return. But unfortunately, it just looks like he's not ever going to be able to really spend much time healthy at this point. And frankly, no matter what happens here, that's going to be the case, because it's going to be a very, very shortened season for him this year. Even if the very best case scenario comes in and the second opinion is perfect and they think it's not really an issue and he can just rehab it again, drain the cyst, all of that, we're still talking about a guy who probably returns in September at the very best case scenario. It just sucks. It really, really sucks. I'm hoping for the best, but signs are not good, like you said.
I've seen some of the reactions online since he had to leave again. And I can understand why people are frustrated about the contract. And again, like you said, I don't think it's that big of an issue on a 1-year deal, but I understand the frustration. What people need to understand, though, is he has given everything that he has to the Brewers and to the organization. And he spoke about it a lot after they gave him that qualifying offer, saying, you know, I don't feel pressure to live up to it, but I understand that it's a big commitment that they're giving me. It's the highest salary for a single year for a pitcher in franchise history. That wasn't lost on him. So he did give it everything he had. I'm sure he's still going to, within the parameters of what he's capable of and what his body's capable of at this point, going to give it everything he has to try to come back again if that's an option for this season. But like you said, people need to understand, like, this, shoulders can be career enders. And that is why we took set such a low bar for what they were going to get out of him when he returned. I think that we said on the show at one point that if you're getting like back of the rotation results, and I can't remember what exactly we said for innings total. I went back and found my tweet from last spring when the Brewers first announced that it was going to take him a while to come back. And I said in that tweet, if you get 100 innings out of him, that's like best case scenario. Like, that should be seen as a massive win if you get 100 innings out of him. And a lot of people were not happy to hear that. And then I think on the show, we may have bumped that down as the rehab moved along to like 85 innings.
It was 80 or 85 for sure.
So both of those numbers, he fell short of both of those last year. He threw 64 innings last year. He threw 45 innings this year. So my original number in spring was 100 innings last season, and you should feel really good about that. They've gotten 110 innings out of him since the surgery over 2 seasons. And he's had multiple flare-ups and multiple issues still kind of stemming from this same thing. And that's not, at no point was that ever meant to be a knock against him or against his work ethic or anything like that. It's just an acknowledgement of this is really, really tricky. This is not something that guys have a good history of coming back from cleanly and performing great and being healthy and all this stuff. He would be breaking the norm here if he did any of that and just came back as normal Brandon Woodruff and could throw 150 to 180 innings again. Where he did prove us wrong, like you said, is it looked so much better than the effectiveness was so much higher than I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to get kind of that 85 innings and it was going to be more like maybe 3.8 pushing 4 ERA with some kind of iffy peripherals, and he was going to find some other ways to get things done. And while he did make adjustments and could do things differently when he needed to, as we've talked about, a lot of it was when he was going and healthy, he was able to slide kind of right back into, I'm just going to pound the zone with fastballs, and guys, due to the sequencing and due to some other stuff and just the characteristics of it outside of the velo, guys are not going to be able to hit it. And that largely was still the case. And I think that's what caught us by surprise more. And like you said, it really took the Brewers extending that qualifying offer. I think that's when we both kind of let our guard down. Like, okay, they wouldn't give this to him if his shoulder was in rough shape. Like, they must see something where they're convinced it's really going to recover well. That has not happened like at all, not even remotely close to it. So again, now you got to start asking the questions of what exactly were they expecting out of him compared to what they've gotten out of him. They made it sound like they were pretty high on what they could get out of him another year removed from surgery. And again, I don't know if that's just public lip service a little bit or what it is. Like you said, 1 year is not going to really cripple them financially at all, especially because, like you said, I don't know where else they would have really allocated that money. But I mean, we've talked about it enough. We're on a years-long stretch here of downplaying injuries and initial opinion from the Brewers being you can rehab this, and then second opinion says, no, you need to get surgery. This is not going to work. I don't want to go into it too much because, like I said, we've talked about it before, and also that I don't feel very good about just hammering that point home right now with what he's dealing with, but it is worth bringing up again, especially now knowing that in a lot of ways, health-wise, it has gone pretty close to as poorly as possible.
Yeah, I think, like you said, that we can save that true discussion for another day, but acknowledging it, I think, is definitely fair, and that's everything you just said is true. I mean, there's no really denying it. So, but just to hammer home the point, I guess, a little bit of the work ethic part, I had people replying to me and saying something like, I had a couple people say something along the lines of, well, he's a professional athlete. It's his job to keep his body in shape. Like his shoulder basically.
His body is not what's letting him down.
His shoulder
has been through so much.
Like, we're not talking about, in fact, I would say he's in better shape than he ever was pre-injury since he's come back. He looks, I remember seeing him when he came back from the rehab and I was like, oh, he looks like he kind of slimmed down and got himself into even better shape. So like, it just, people have to understand that arm injuries more often than not are going to be caused by just pure bad luck. And also the fact that throwing a baseball and pitching in baseball is one of the most unnatural things an athlete does. It is not a normal thing that your body is built to do. So sometimes the very best athlete in the world who does everything right is still going to have an arm injury and he can't do anything about it. And trying to blame, I think it's almost always ridiculous to blame athletes for injuries. I think you can at times point out a guy who maybe got super out of shape or something, and you could say, okay, yeah, that led to some stuff. But That is not the case for Woodruff, and I can't think of a single time it's been a case for the Brewers in a long time. So I probably shouldn't have even acknowledged it. Like, there's no reason to acknowledge that kind of idiocy. We might as well just move on from it.
Brewers have another starting pitcher who is also dealing with a little something. It's hard to say a whole lot about it because the Brewers haven't said a ton about it yet, and we'll kind of see how he looks coming out of the All-Star break. But Kyle Harrison was pulled from his last start in St. Louis. It was his second straight outing where he didn't work very deep into the game. Command was not amazing. Things just weren't looking quite normal for him. The velo was down about half a tick in St. Louis. Both he and Pat Murphy said that he's got some elbow soreness right now on the outer side of that left elbow. Murphy's quote post-game was, "It's obvious he's fatigued." According to Adam McCalvey, Harrison said that he thinks it's the extensor muscles in his elbow that are giving him a little bit of problems right now. Murphy also said he's not hurt. He just said he's fatigued and he's sore. So kind of unclear exactly what the outlook is. They're letting on right now that they think it's just a little bit of fatigue. They're going to, I would imagine, line up the rotation in a way where he gets extra days off coming out of the All-Star break. That break gives you the opportunity to reset the pecking order, so you could get him up to 10 days off between starts here. So we're kind of in wait-and-see mode on that one. But like I've said before, this is the Brewers, and this would not be the first time that the Brewers said something and then it ended up being something a little longer term. We'll just have to wait and see, though, and just kind of see if he gets back on the mound after the break, just how sharp everything looks. So there have been times, though, where this has been the case and it hasn't been a big deal. Coleman Crowe had the flexor strain that ended up not being a huge deal. He got back to rehabbing pretty quickly. So guys also go through aches and pains and different things throughout the season that we don't always tend to hear about a lot. So wait and see. We'll figure out what exactly is going on here. But that is the latest on Kyle Harrison.
Yeah, like the induced vertical break on the fastball is down a couple inches yesterday in the St. Louis start too. So that he looked off. Honestly, maybe concerns me a little bit less that there's something going on and it's not just him kind of starting to lose some of the velo, the fastball, the command. But assuming it is minor, I guess I should say. But yeah, there's not really a ton here until we either get new news or we see what he looks like coming out of the break.
Some good news on the injury front. Logan Henderson returned from the injured list. He got the start on Thursday for that final game in St. Louis, threw the ball pretty well for the most part. We'll break down his outing later in the show when we get to recapping that series. But for now, he's going to be back in that rotation. So the timing works out pretty well with Brandon Woodruff going down and Logan Henderson coming back. I know early before the start of the season, we talked about being a little skeptical that the Brewers were adding so much pitching and not necessarily having a super deep left side of the infield, but I think it's certainly worked in the way that they thought it was going to work so far, at least on the pitching side, where you could actually argue maybe they need even more starters next season, and you actually do need to have 20 big league starting pitchers on your depth chart to get through a season at this point. But the depth has definitely helped them out a lot this year. They've never really had a period where it's felt like they're super short on arms. They've gotten close once or twice, but even with Woodruff going down, Henderson back, Crowe working his way back, they're going to be in an okay spot, I think, for now, barring another series of injuries, which you can never rule out. But good to have him back. On the position player side, David Hamilton left Monday's game after hitting a big double in the late innings. He was placed on the IL with a mild hamstring strain. The Brewers selecting Greg Jones back to the 40-man roster because he was outrighted earlier in the year. So he's back up for his second stint with the ball club. We weren't going to talk a whole lot about Greg Jones on this week's show because I think in the grand scheme of everything, this is a pretty minor plot point in the Brewers 2026 season. But we did get some questions about Greg Jones. AK Brewfan asked on Twitter, how long can they get by with Greg Jones as the only backup coverage for the left side of the infield? And then Trail on the Brewer Fanatic forums asked, should the Brewers move one of their infield prospects to the 40-man roster? Does Hamilton's recent injury illustrate the need for this? Seems they're a little exposed right now if there is a more serious injury. So This sounds like it's going to be pretty short term more than anything, and I would guess that played a pretty big role in the route that they choose to take. If it is a mild hamstring strain and you have the All-Star break coming up, there's a very real possibility here that David Hamilton just does not miss many games at all. Now, the one thing I would be careful about is so much of David Hamilton's value comes from his speed. I think there is a difference between rushing David Hamilton back and saying David Hamilton come back when you're at like 95% or 90% healthy enough to play, but maybe not 100%. I don't know that he's going to be a very useful player in any way if he comes back in that form. So I don't know all of the science behind how they rehab particular hamstring injuries, but from my perspective, I would be saying you really got to make sure that he's ready to go when you bring him back, compared to some other guys who, even if they're not 100%, they can maybe fall back on some other attributes. Maybe it's a guy who hits a little more. Maybe it's kind of a Christian Yelich situation early in the year where it was like they did fast track him back a little bit from a soft tissue injury because he's a DH. And once he was good enough to play, they basically plugged him back in there. You don't quite have that same luxury here. So I would be careful about that. But assuming it's a short-term issue, I would not be shocked if the Brewers think that Greg Jones is kind of David Hamilton light, just in terms of the physical attributes that he has. Now, I would argue that Greg Jones just does not have good enough mastery of those physical tools to be playing big league baseball. But if it's a short-term absence and they think, hey, we're going to be without David Hamilton for a few games here, let's just put the next speedy guy who in theory has the athleticism to play all around the diamond, and we'll put him on the roster and he'll play a few games and then Hamilton's back and that's it. I don't think I would have gone this way, but if that's the explanation, I can understand why they did this, even if I don't know that having Greg Jones as the only backup coverage for the left side of the infield for any period of time is necessarily the best way to go. But that's kind of my thought on it for now.
Yeah, we're bringing a lot of Andrew Vaughn at third base disrespect to the table right now because he has made the two plays that he's had a chance to make at third base so far. So, no, I'm with you. I'm sure that's what the thought is. Seeing how he looked at second, and I'll give him a pass for his 115 mile per hour Jordan Walker ball that I think it was ruled an error, but it should have been an error, but it was also just absolutely smoked. I'll give him a pass for that one, but he looked extremely uncomfortable at second base the whole game. Like nothing he did looked natural at all. My guess is they weren't really expecting a Terang off day, and maybe after the doubleheader, it just felt like he needed one. It was just time to give him one, so they were like, well, we can put Greg Jones in there. But I think I could actually legitimately make an argument that Ortiz at second and Vaughn at third might be a better way to go if they need to do that again. So that maybe says what I think about Greg Jones as a big league player. To answer the question from Trail, they don't really have any need to move anyone onto the 40-man roster unless they're actually calling them up. That doesn't really do much for them in the moment, obviously, just to put somebody on the 40-man. I think the issue that arises here is what Jack kind of talked about with when Hamilton returns. If they think Hamilton's going to be almost right after the All-Star break, which I think 10 full days would probably take you to that first day out of the All-Star break, like if you had the minimum stay, then having somebody that you feel comfortable just DFAing is probably the best call here. And that means, obviously, you could do Jet Williams. You could put Jet Williams on the 40-man. You could call him up. You wouldn't DFA him. You would option him. But you would have started his clock for like 5 games, basically. And that would really be the only reason he'd be up. It'd be for 5 games. You'd send him back down. You'd have started his clock. You'd have started the service time, everything else. You'd also have added him to the 40-man, which he's not on a 40-man right now. So that takes away some flexibility. Eddie's Leonard, I think a lot of people, including myself, would have at some point loved to have seen him get a shot here. I think the Brewers like him. I think they view him as a guy who is a legitimate potential big leaguer, but he's out of options. So if they brought him up, he also would have to be DFA'd if they were to take him off the roster. So I think the only reason you would see a guy like Leonard is if there is a long-term opening on the roster where they could give him a legitimate chance to maybe show he's a big leaguer before having to make any decision. This is not that. So in the end, you probably could have convinced me to like sign Tyler Saladino off the streets and it would have been a better call here. But I understand the logic. I think it's fine. I would say the odds of seeing Jones play, at least start a game in the infield again, are pretty low. And again, I would kind of guess that they probably do go the Vaughn route before they go to Jones if they need somebody at third. Or if Pratt goes out and Ortiz goes to short, something like that. I don't really think we'll see Greg Jones play much more infield after that first showing. If they need a pinch runner, he's fast. He can give you something like that. And in a break in case of emergency, he does have that infield experience. So you can at least throw him out there and it's not going to be too bad, I guess.
A couple more injury updates to roll through really quickly. Joel Kuhnel was placed on the injured list with a right shoulder impingement. Craig Yoho was recalled. We'll talk about Craig Yoho a little bit later. Coleman Crow is going to make his second rehab start on Friday night for Nashville. Carlos Rodriguez and Rob Z are also on rehab assignments. Rodriguez is pitching for Nashville as well. Rob Z is in the ACL, starting to build back up. DL Hall had progressed to throwing bullpens. He's going to throw his first live BP on July 16th. So a little bit of good news on that front. That should help the bullpen. And then the last piece of roster news is the more positive piece of roster news that we have for the week. Luis Lara made his big league debut in St. Louis. The Brewers promoting him from AAA Nashville, optioning Blake Perkins down. So he's up here. He got into a couple of games during the St. Louis series. We got several versions of this question, so instead of rolling through those questions, we're just going to talk about it, basically asking what the fit is right now. Where is he going to play? When is he going to play? Because that was one of the things that we talked about as far as the call-up timeline. You got to get him regular at-bats, and you sent out Blake Perkins, who was basically switch hitter in name only. He was serving as a right-handed hitting outfielder just because he struggled so much from the left side. Lara, like Perkins, switch hitter. But I think the question now is, how do they get him more playing time than they were getting Blake Perkins? How long is he going to be up here? The timing did feel interesting for me. I've got my somewhat tinfoil hat thought on what could be going on here, but I'm going to pass this one off to you first just to kind of see what you think right now of the timing and the fit and what you think this might mean for the outfield picture.
Yeah, it is interesting. You go back like 3 episodes, I predicted he'd be up before the All-Star break. You go back 1 episode, and I had basically said, well, that's not going to happen now because, Mitchell and Frelick are both playing quite well. You're just bringing him up, and the Blake Perkins role isn't going to get him much playing time. So, yeah, I think it's a very fair question how they're going to make it work. I think Perkins wasn't necessarily a no-doubt start against lefties. I think Lara will become a no-doubt start against lefties. He will be in there for one of Mitchell or Sal Frelick in those games. I think what you have to do, though, is you have to kind of rotate through the outfield. Maybe it's a Jackson Chourio DH game or an off day. Mitchell can get an off day. Frelick can get an off day. In my eyes, I think unless he is playing at least 4 out of every 7 for Lara, I think that's where I can at least set the floor for where I feel comfortable about saying, yeah, he's in the big leagues and he's playing 4 out of 7 games in a week. Obviously, there's going to be off days and stuff too, but I'm just saying on average, I guess I'd feel comfortable with it. I think the only way you can do that is by, again, making sure he's always starting against the lefty and then making sure he just kind of rotates through the outfield, getting guys a day off, or like I said, a Chourio DH. I can't help but wonder if, Yelich's struggles contribute to maybe we do put Churio at DH a little bit more, and our outfield of Frelick, Mitchell, and Lara is really, really good defensively, and then you might even have your best lineup out there too at the same time if Lara shows decently. So I think they can make it work. I'd be lying if I said I had a ton of faith in them making it work how I hope they make it work. But I do think the only thing I'm quite certain of is that he will be out there when a lefty is on the mound. He's been a better hitter from the right side than the left side this year. That's where most of his power has shown up. Don't expect much power, but if you do see it, I think it's going to be from that side. So that's the one thing I'm pretty confident in right now. The rest I'm mostly in wait and see mode.
So you mentioned the timing being weird because Garrett Mitchell and Sal Frelick are both playing well. That's kind of at the heart of my tinfoil hat take. I think you know where I'm going with this. And this is purely speculation. I don't know anything about this. And I'm not saying this is going to happen because there would be some implications here that we have seen not work out so well for them in the past. But I do wonder, partially, is he up here to prove that he's ready to go and to boost their comfort level in selling high on a Garrett Mitchell or selling on a Sal Frelick when those guys are playing well? I don't know that that's what's going to happen because those are both two guys that are a pretty big part of the clubhouse culture, especially Sal. That'd be a pretty big hit to the clubhouse if you traded him in particular. We saw how poorly that went the last time that they traded away a big league player in the middle of a contending season, but that just feels like it would be a convenient answer to a lot of what's going on here right now. Like he's up here for 3 weeks before, well, more like 2 weeks of playing time before the deadline for them to kind of get a gauge on, okay, if there's a particular package out there where they can maybe cash in on an outfielder who they're a little bit uncertain about what his long-term outlook is, but they know he's talented and he's playing well right now. Is there something you can get for him if that opportunity presents itself? Jeff Passan wrote something today saying that the Brewers, they're not shopping Garrett Mitchell. They're not shopping any of their outfielders, but you never know what's going to come up. That's my take on maybe what could be happening. Like I said, that's only speculative, and I may be like 35% believe that. But like I said, it would explain some things because otherwise it does seem like kind of weird timing. There's a little bit of a log jam here. I don't know where you get him all of the playing time that I think he needs to develop right now. I don't think it benefits him a whole lot to, even though he probably would be helpful in a fourth or fifth outfield role. I don't think that's great for him right now. Yeah. So maybe Yelich is part of it too, like you said, where he's going to be playing less and that helps out a little bit too. It is a weird fit for right now though. So I can't shake like this small notion in the back of my head that there's a little more to this than what we're seeing on the surface.
Yeah, I did figure that was where you were going with it, so I figured I would let you have that. I can't rule it out. Like, it does make some sense. Like you said, Jeff Passan kind of hinted at least the possibility of that being something the Brewers would consider today. So it wouldn't shock me. I think odds are they probably wouldn't feel like they get enough value in any deals that are being thrown around. And in the end, they're going to keep the guy who's genuinely been incredible for like the last month and a half now in terms of results. Like we are talking about like a 960 OPS, I think, over the last 45 games or something for Garrett Mitchell. Like it has been very, very, very good. And he's playing great defense. I know one of the questions did ask who's a better defender in center, Mitchell or Lara. I think it's a good question because I genuinely do believe that Luis Lara is the best defensive outfielder I've seen in the Brewers system at any point. He didn't look super comfortable in right field, obviously, in the Cardinals series. He'd only played 7 games out there in the minor leagues and much smaller ballparks, and I think in his mind, he was about to hit a wall that was nowhere near him on a couple of those balls that he was going back for. But when he settles into having 3 levels to the stadium and reading the ball and all that, like, he's going to be a very, very good defender. But Garrett's been very good too. So I think it's pretty close. I think Lara is pretty easily better than Sal Frelick and Jackson Churio defensively. But I do think since Mitchell has turned it on a little bit in terms of being willing to lay out and run into a wall and just the ground that he covers and the athleticism he has, like, I think that one's pretty close right now. I do think that once Lara gets comfortable and if he does settle in center field, we will see that he is, in the longer run, a better center fielder.
Without further ado, then let's dive into the week that was of Milwaukee Brewers baseball. The Brewers embarking on kind of a gauntlet of a road trip here leading into the All-Star break, because how else would it work out with the scheduling and with the rainouts? They went to Arizona first, where they took 2 of 3, starting with a 7-4 win in Game 1. Don't let the score deceive you, though. This one was kind of going in all kinds of different directions. Brewers got out to an early lead thanks to a Garrett Mitchell homer, and then things flipped when Lourdes Gurriel robbed Mitchell of what would have been his second home run, this one to left field. So after that home run robbery, the Diamondbacks quickly put up 3 on Kyle Harrison in the bottom of the third, so the next half inning, that tied things up. Chad Patrick, though, saving the day with a very impressive effort in long relief of Kyle Harrison. 3 1/3 for Patrick, allowing just 1 hit and striking out a pair. From there, the bullpens pretty much locked it down, and it seemed like this was going to be a game that was going to be kind of a Wild West. And for the remainder of regulation, it was not, until we got into the 11th inning and the Brewers put up 4 with an assist from Ryan Thompson, who got a slow chopper back, not toward the mound. It was kind of in no man's land, a little closer to the foul line, going toward third base. Clearly has no play because he's falling down as he picks up the baseball. And if you hold on to that ball, I think it was bases loaded. So you hold on to the ball, 1 run comes in, whatever. Let's just try to get out of it now because you're the home team. You're going to have a decent chance, presumably, at scoring multiple runs there with the zombie runner on second base going into the bottom of the 11th. He picks up the ball, though, as he's falling down and chucks it to home plate. The ball does not go anywhere close to home plate. Brewers get some more runs off of that, kind of blowing it open a little bit there. And then Grant Anderson closing it down, working a second inning in the 11th to give the Brewers a series opening win. That was the wild one in this series. Pat Murphy had some interesting comments about this one. An interesting game to stay up late and view the entirety of as well, if you were able to tolerate it all.
Yes, it was. That the Ryan Thompson play, it just gave me flashbacks to just PFP work with pitchers and them thinking they can do things that they just truly can't do. They have absolutely zero chance of pulling off, and it's a confident bunch. Pitchers believe that. I was one of them. Don't get me wrong. I was one of them. But we always believe we can make those plays and make that type of play. And going full-blown Superman outstretched, trying to throw from that angle. I mean, he threw it 20 feet to the left of home plate. That was one of my favorite plays and just a fantastic replay to watch in slow motion. But yeah, like you said, if he just ate it, he would have had a pretty good chance of limiting the damage. And as the home team, even if you give up 2, you're coming up to the plate with the tying run at the plate in the bottom half, no matter what. So a mistake, Brewers took advantage of it. We talked about it kind of the last couple of weeks. When you get those mistakes, you have to capitalize on them, and they did. They added on. They made it more than just those 2 runs. And that made things feel a little more comfortable because Anderson he wasn't in big trouble, but, Nolan Arenado missed a home run by about a foot foul, and it would have been a lot hairier had it not been a 4-run lead. So, yeah, that was just more than anything. I just really enjoyed watching that replay because it just reminded me of, as a coach and as a player, watching pitchers try and do things that they're just absolutely not capable of.
Brewers would end up on the losing end of game 2, 4-3. This is the Brandon Woodruff start. We talked about that earlier. He left with the injury after the velo drop. So it was Craig Yoho's turn to be the long man in this one. A little bit of a breakthrough outing for him. 2 2/3 scoreless. He went 4 ups in working that 2 2/3, and the pitch count was actually pretty economical over that stretch. He didn't strike, or he only had 1 strikeout, I should say. And the biggest difference in this one, he's throwing a sinker now, purportedly. I don't think anyone has actually confirmed it with him, but I know StatCast changed the classification, and they usually don't just change that, so they must have found something out from somebody somehow. It's not crazy different than his normal four-seamer because he's a low slot guy and he's right behind the ball when he throws a fastball. Really, the bigger difference, I think, more than the arm side run, was the depth. I think it's like 3 fewer inches of induced vertical break. I know like the average arm side is a little higher, but he was also touching 17 arm side on some four-seamers too. So I don't know that this necessarily makes a huge difference for him if you just look at the movement, but he was throwing strikes with it. It's a fastball that the Brewers decide is so much better than his four-seamer, and they feel like he can throw a fastball in the strike zone, and they're going to use him now. I'm more than okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, he was throwing strikes with it, and he was throwing a bit harder, and I think that kind of carried over into the other outing since he made that switch too. So
I wonder if he can kind of rip off the two seams a little better.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, I wonder if there's just a little more comfortability with it where it just comes off the fingers better, and if that means more strikes and more velo, even if the shape is almost, a coin toss or just slightly different, I'll take that trade-off because, like you said, if it gives the Brewers more confidence in using him, as we talked about when he got optioned, I'll take anything that gets him more opportunities because I still think there's quite a bit there. And this was a nice example of what it can look like, and not even necessarily in the most ideal world of how I would envision his outings going, because there wasn't a ton of strikeouts or swing and miss, but ground balls, able to throw strikes, use the changeup. I mean, this was really, really good to see. And as you mentioned, 4 ups is not, I don't think he's done that in his pro career. If he has, it's all the way back in his debut level at the high A level. So that was really nice to see for him too. Just the Brewers needed it. They needed it badly in this stretch. And for him to give it to him, that was a really big part of it. And then also just the fact that he did it in a way that was a little different, showed some new stuff, and threw a bunch of strikes. That was a really big positive in a otherwise pretty tough game, seeing Woodruff leave, and obviously a loss for the Brewers too.
For as tough as this game felt, it was really close for most of the game. Christian Yelich homered. It was a middle 91.5 mile an hour four-seamer with a bad shape from Merrill Kelly, so I would not look at that home run and say he's back or his timing is better or anything is fixed like that. That was a pretty hittable pitch. Good on him for doing what you should do with that pitch, but it's a pretty hittable pitch. And also his struggles stretched into the St. Louis series, culminating in an off day on Thursday. Jackson Chourio, though, homered off of Paul Sewald in the 9th, which was pretty notable after Jared Koenig allowed a run in the bottom of the 8th to stretch that Arizona lead to 4-2. So we did get a question on Twitter asking, Koenig is cooked, right? Who are potential left-handed relievers they could add at the deadline? So as someone who has probably been taking more of the negative route when they do have injuries to pitchers lately, and someone who's generally been pretty skeptical of everything that they're telling us about pitcher injuries, I don't know if I'm ready to say he's cooked yet. To me, it just feels, what I've seen since he's come back has felt like an exact continuation of what the rehab assignment looked like, which was one day it actually looked pretty good and pretty normal and fine, and then the next day it looks awful. And that's kind of what I've seen in his outing since he's come back. His first outing off the injured list, I said this to you, I actually thought he looked really, really good.
Yeah, he did.
He looked like Jared Koenig. He was touching 97 with the sinker. I think the average velo was 95. And remember, Jared Koenig has never been like a huge command guy. When he's at his very best, he's got kind of that front door corner to righties on lockdown, and he can paint the ball there. But for the most part, a lot of his success was coming from throwing this seam-shifted two-seam fastball that paired with kind of that crossfire delivery. Guys are seeing that ball come out of his hand, and they're expecting it to cut, and then it runs. and he kind of gets some weird takes and he gets some weird swings, all while throwing a lot of those sinkers pretty much right down the middle. So whenever there's a guy who's making it work based on the movement a little bit and the deception and the angles, like the velo obviously helped a lot too, but then I'm a little more willing to say, well, even if Jared Koenig comes back throwing 94 or 93, like he might still be okay. And like I said, he looked really good in that first outing. Since then, he's kind of been all over the place, and that's obviously not going to work. So I think you're kind of in wait and see mode, but the trade deadline probably is kind of that cutoff point coming up of knowing, okay, do we need something else, or is this going to get the job done for us? You do have DL Hall working his way back. As far as left-handed relievers go, I know that you've talked about Aroldis Chapman a couple of different times about how you see the fit there.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Red Sox seem to be putting themselves back into the absolutely insane American League playoff race because the AL is just absolutely horrible this year, and almost every team is, in theory, within reach of a playoff spot. So there are some rumors that the Red Sox aren't even going to be looking to sell much this year now. So we'll see. I don't have many other names, to be honest. I don't really know on the left-handed side of things where they would go from there. It might be DL Hall coming back. I don't really think they're going to count on Rob Zistrizny now at this point, just because, unfortunately, health has been very, very hard for him to come by for the last couple of years, but he could at least be an option if he's healthy. Yeah, it might have to be kind of an under-the-radar pickup if they do go get somebody. I haven't looked super deep into it other than Chapman felt like a good fit just because of lefty leverage and some velo, which is always something that I prefer in my bullpen rather than, if I'm being honest, that is one place where like I really want velocity in my pen for the most part. Like I don't love the idea of the soft tossing guys. Like I know there are outliers, and like a Hobie Milner is somebody who I could still buy into that type of profile, but there aren't too many soft tossing relievers. Like I want guys who throw gas, and I think it gives them a lot more room for error if they are missing spots that day. Or you mentioned like with Koenig, he can make it work without the velo, but part of what has made it work over the last couple of years is that when he's not commanding it well, he's still throwing it 95 plus, and it just gives him that little margin for error where guys might be a tick late on it, even though he left it over the middle or anything else there. Like I want velocity, so I haven't looked super deep into it, especially left-handed specific, but Chapman's still the name that would stand out to me. I don't know if he's actually going to be on the move anymore.
There's more power righty relievers out there than lefty relievers if you're looking for like the dark horse stuff type trade targets. So I keep coming back to I think they're going to trade for a starting pitcher. I really think they're going to trade for a starting pitcher. And if you do that, then I think you maybe have the potential to either move. You can move Drowan back to the bullpen. You could use Gasser out of the bullpen. We'll talk about Shane when we get into the Cardinals series, but I think there's definitely starter potential there, but the sample is growing for me of seeing him just not look super sharp as a starting pitcher. So I'm kind of getting more on board with trade for a starter, move him back to the bullpen where he can just kind of let it eat a little bit more and not have to worry so much about all this other stuff that comes with starting. Again, not that he's not capable of starting. I think he can still do that long term, but the more I'm seeing of it, I'm kind of thinking it's just not. I know the results have been good, but I can't count too many starts at this point where it has legitimately looked really, really good as opposed to it's kind of shaky and he's finding ways to get through it. So we'll talk about that with his next start coming up here, but that's kind of where I'm at with how you might approach that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think putting him back in that role where the stuff can play up would be somewhat a backwards way of adding a lefty to the pen, and then you add a starter to replace him. That makes sense.
Game 3 of the Diamondback series to get back on track here. Milwaukee 3, Arizona 2. Speaking of guys not looking good, but kind of getting through it, Brandon Sproat, I'm just going to say he looked bad in this one. Like just spraying the ball all over the place, not competitive, not close with a lot of misses. And yet, as has been the case in some of these starts, the stuff was still good enough that he went 4 innings with 1 earned run. He did allow 5 hits. He walked 3 guys. He had a 46% in zone rate, but he also had 4 strikeouts. So Pat Murphy was pretty critical of this outing in post game, and I think rightfully so. It was not good. Like you can see the 4 innings, 1 earned, and say it was a fine start. No, he looked really bad for a lot of this, and just to be completely honest about it, the Brewers, meanwhile, were facing off against left-hander Eduardo Rodriguez, who is having a very interesting season in which he has great results and just no good peripherals at all. And you could kind of see how it was happening early in this game where the Brewers were hitting some balls on the screws and they were just finding gloves against Eduardo Rodriguez. I would imagine that without going through and watching a lot of his starts, he has had a fair amount of those kind of breaks in some of his outings. There was one inning, I can't remember which inning it was, but Mitchell and Bowers back-to-back hit like 115-mile-an-hour screamers, and they were both caught. I think they were the first 2 batters of the inning in a row. But the Brewers did finally break through. Jake Bowers finally broke through and had the last laugh when he hit a go-ahead homer off of Rodriguez in the 7th. That gave the Brewers the lead. They then added some insurance in the form of a Gary Sanchez double and a Joey Ortiz RBI single, which ended up being pretty big because Aaron Ashby, shaky once again in this one. He was shaky in St. Louis on Thursday as well. Just, we're not going to go through the whole thing with him, but it really is starting to look like the workload is catching up to him a little bit. But the insurance run ended up being big because it was able to help the Brewers secure a series win in Arizona.
Yeah. Just to touch on the Sproat part quickly. You're correct in saying it was a terrible outing because it was. He pitched very poorly. You don't average 2 base runners an inning and get out of it with 1 earned after 4 innings. Like that just doesn't happen. But I will at least give him credit for being able to bear down and get through it. Obviously, that's something we've talked about with him, is letting stuff snowball on him and not really being able to get through, and maybe having a big inning that really takes him out of the game even earlier than 4 innings. It just was funny to me post game. There wasn't even like a semblance from Murph on like, well, he did a good job fighting through, but he's got to be better than that. It was just straight up, no, it wasn't good. It's not good enough. He knows it. I was like, yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, it's true. There's no arguing it. And to be honest with you, I've actually been wondering if Sproat is a guy who the Brewers have found kind of responds to tough love. You go back to when I think it was that Houston start. That was when Murph was really, really hard on him after the game. And there was another one around that same time. And then the Cleveland one, which is in the middle of like some decent starts, actually, that he cramped in as well. And he got kind of lit up publicly after the game there. I'm starting to wonder if it really is something where they believe that's actually the best way to handle him is to be really hard on him and tough love and give him the maybe not even the truth, maybe just even exaggerating the truth a little bit and telling him like, hey, we need you to be better. And behind closed doors, I'm sure there's some, and we know you can be better, and here's how we're going to help you be better. But I wonder if there is some of that, because he just gets, every time it doesn't go perfectly for him, it seems like he gets it pretty good in the media, and he's not complaining, and things have been better for him in general since then. So maybe it really is just the way they're approaching it with him.
The Brewers then went to St. Louis, where they played a 5-game series, including that doubleheader, the makeup from a few weeks back. Game 1, the Brewers winning this one 4-3. Like we said, Shane Drowan. So if you look at the box score line in this one, it's the story is not great early, but then settled in and was super efficient the rest of the way. 6 innings, 6 hits, 3 runs, only one of them earned, a couple walks, a couple strikeouts. I don't know if he settled in so much as he just started getting a few atom balls as the game went along, because he only had 5 whiffs in this one. 13 of the 22 batted balls he gave up were hard hit. So like over half of the balls in play he gave up. I think that's almost 60%. He had a 49% in zone rate. Like, I don't know that he actually got that much better as the game went along. So kind of speaks to what I was saying before about, he's finding ways to work through it. And I can emphasize that point a little more because when I just watch him pitch, I think you can see a maturity there. And if you listen to him talk after his outings, like there's a maturity there, and he's a little bit older than some of these other younger starters, and I think he's been through a little bit more, so he kind of knows how to navigate. But also, this is another outing where I think he was just getting away with some process based stuff that was not great. It's kind of funny because it seems like in most of his outings where he has had a pretty good process as a starter, like the 3 starts or whatever, where he's getting a lot of swing and miss and throwing strikes and missing the barrel. Those are the outings where his results have been the worst. And then these are the outings where he's not giving up runs, or at least a whole lot of earned runs. So, like I said, I don't think he was great in this one. It was obviously big for them to still get 6 innings out of him. That seemed unfathomable after a long 3rd inning in which the Brewers defense did absolutely nothing to help him out. It started with a fielding error by Bryce Terang. Then there was a pop-up closer to home plate than third base, but William Contreras just did not know where it was, so David Hamilton bailed him out and made actually a really, really impressive play, covering a ton of ground coming in from behind third base and being able to catch that pop-up that, like I said, was a lot closer to basically the on-deck circle, is kind of in the vicinity of where it was. And then David Hamilton promptly makes a fielding mistake because he gets a soft roller toward third base with the bases loaded. He's coming in on it, and the play is taking your momentum directly toward home plate. Instead, he picks it up and tries to reset his momentum and turn a double play. They barely get the guy going to second. They obviously don't get the guy going to first. A run scores. I get what he was going for, because there was 1 out. If you turn the double play, you're out of the inning, but you just have to take the lead guy there. That prolonged the inning a little bit. Then Shane Drohan picks off Jose Fermin at first base with Nelson Velasquez on third. They get Fermin in a rundown where it's very clear they're going to get him out. Like, he's got nowhere to go. Velasquez is maybe 15 feet off the base, and Fermin starts pointing at him to go, saying, like, I'm going to be in the rundown, like, get moving. And it seemed like as soon as Bryce Terang saw that, he just fired the ball to third base when, like I said, Velasquez was actually very close to the bag to begin with, so he got in safe pretty easily. He was initially ruled out, but the replay showed that he got in pretty easily. Everybody's safe. It didn't end up costing Drohan a whole lot compared to some of these other plays, because I think he only threw like 2 or 3 more pitches and then he was out of the inning. But nonetheless, not the sharpest inning for the Milwaukee Brewers infield defense, especially a team that's usually pretty good at this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, especially with 2 of them involving Terang, that's just not something you're used to seeing very often. The first and third one was the most frustrating for sure, because you're 100% right. Like, David Hamilton should come in and throw that ball to home. When you're charging a ball like that and your momentum is taking you towards home, like, the thing I'm going to tell a third baseman every single time the bases are loaded is wherever it takes you, you're going wherever it takes you. So if it takes you to third base, step on third, throw across. If it takes you towards second, field it, throw to second. If you're coming in on the ball, throw it home. So that was a weird play. But the first and third was just, like, for a guy who doesn't make many IQ or like low IQ plays on the baseball field, that was just a really weird play from Terang to basically just go into panic mode. It looked like maybe just the overall inning, maybe it just felt like it was snowballing so much that he got himself a little bit more panicked about, like, we need to make sure that run doesn't score. We got to make sure we get the out, but we got to make sure that run doesn't score, and just too much going on. But he could have ran down Fermin or made another throw. And, like, Nelson Velasquez is not super fast, and he was not very far off that base. So like you said, maybe the point from Fermin just made Terang think that he had taken off and kind of looked up. And then by the time he looked at third, maybe he just figured, well, Fermin's going to get back to first, I better fire to third. I really don't know, but it was an unexpectedly weird and just not very smart play from a guy who is, if he makes a mistake, it's going to be physical, like almost every time. And he doesn't make many of those either, but mental errors from Bryce Terang are very rare. And this was one of the more obvious ones we've seen. It was just weird. It wasn't something I'm used to seeing from him.
He would make up for it a little bit later, though, as part of a 4-run 7th-inning comeback. Started with a Garrett Mitchell single, a Sal Frelick double, and then a Cooper Pratt reach on error. So a very Brewers start to that inning. David Hamilton then hit that 2-run double, after which he left with that hamstring injury. Bryce Terang then taking it home with a go-ahead RBI single, as the Brewers would win this one in comeback fashion 4-3. We would have the same score in game 2 of the series, the first game of doubleheader day, 4-3 Brewers. Jacob Mizorowski on the bump for this one. 7 innings for him. Only gave up 3 hits, but he did give up 3 runs because 2 of them were homers. He punched out 11, though, and did not walk anybody. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but one of those homers was a first pitch cutter to Jordan Walker, who destroyed it. And again, this is a first pitch cutter that got a lot of the plate, but we talked about this a lot last time. Just guys are late on the fastball. We don't need to throw the 95-mile-an-hour cutter that, if you just think about it, if you're late on triple digits and you get 95, you're going to be on time for 95. And Jordan Walker was on time for 95. I think even Tim Dillard said something about it on the broadcast, like not criticizing the pitch call, but saying it almost kind of seemed like he was trying to gear up for a fastball, and then he got 95, so he was able to pull 95 over the left field fence. So after that home run, there were no more cutters thrown until the 5th inning. So I'm inclined to believe that something happened as a result of that pitch.
Yeah, and that was the 3rd straight batter that they had started with a cutter as well. So I think there's a very real possibility that Jordan Walker was trying to catch up the fastball and he got a hittable cutter because, like we've talked about, that's what can happen if you basically play into their timing. And I also think there's a world where he went up there and said, I'm just going to sell out for a cutter here because they've thrown it 2 in a row to start, guys. And I'm probably not catching up to the fastball anyway, so I might as well look for the more hittable pitch and try and drive it. So in either scenario, I don't, we don't need to rehash the whole thing. But it just doesn't make sense. I'm glad. I think somebody got a talking to, whether it was both Miz and Contreras, whatever it was. It seemed pretty clear that after that they were told the cutter is used in very rare circumstances, and we use it to maybe steal a pitch when we haven't shown it in a while, like that. And that's how it should be used in my eyes. Like that's pretty much what the actual use for the cutter should be. Maybe you need a strike in certain situations and you want to go to it, but even then I would rather just say, beat me on 102 plus. Can you do that? And Herrera did it later in the game. And I didn't love that sequence either, but I'll still give the guy, more than anything, I'll give the hitter credit for catching up to 102 and turning it around. Like that, if Miz is going to get beat on 102 plus fastballs, that's more of I'll tip the cap situation in most scenarios. I think there are some where you can see a guy is maybe catching up to it, and that's when you need to go to a bigger breaking ball or something. But in most scenarios, I'm not going to be too nitpicky about it. If you're going to throw a ton of fastballs with Miz, I'm going to feel good about it for the most part. So the cutter thing, I hope after 2 games in a row of that kind of being the big issue that led to most of the run scoring, hopefully we've learned that lesson now and we won't have to talk about this after Miz's next start.
This is probably, if I had to circle one game from the last week where I was really raising an eyebrow over a lot of the pitch calling in a game, this was probably the one. It got better after this, but there were still just sequences where there were curveballs when guys were late on fastballs, and it just still felt like in some ways you were trying to get too cute. But I think like fastball curveball is going to work better than fastball cutter. So it's an improvement, but I digress. The Brewers did chip back throughout this game, and then they were able to take the lead on Christian Yelich's 7th inning double for another comeback win for Milwaukee. Then in the doubleheader, this one was not close, 10-2 Brewers. We're not going to go into too much detail on this one. Robert Gasser gave them a lot of much needed length. 7 2/3 for him, 4 hits, 2 earned runs, only a walk, 4 strikeouts, a homer. Not a whole lot of whiffs for him in this one. Not a lot of whiffs in general for the starting pitchers. Just about everybody who started in this series has a four-seam fastball that tends to get a lot of whiffs. And out of all those guys, Jacob Mizorowski was the only guy who was actually getting some whiff on his fastball. And even he was getting less whiff than he normally does on his fastball. I think this is just a Cardinals team that is pretty good at getting on top of those upshoot four-seamers compared to a lot of teams. So not a lot of whiff for Gasser, but he was attacking the strike zone, 57% of his pitches in the zone, and he induced a lot of weak contact by mixing in that sweeper. Average exit velo of 84.5 miles an hour in this one. His velo was up as well, especially early on. He was sitting 93 through like the first 3 innings, and he was still able to climb it up a little bit toward the end of the outing too. So strong start for him. Arguably his best outing in the big leagues to date. Seems like he's kind of starting to find his footing a little bit. This was then Luis Lara's debut game. He hit a 2-run single in his 3rd career at bat in the big leagues. So getting on the board that way, that was kind of a cool moment to see the dugout reaction and see them acquire the ball right away after that hit. See Luis Lara asking them to acquire the ball immediately after that hit. But you could tell that a couple of guys on the end of the dugout really had his back on that one. Then we're not going to go through the entire 7-run 7th inning, but the Brewers batted around. There was a lot that happened, a lot of hits. Ended up being a very comfortable win for the Brewers to finish off the doubleheader sweep.
Yeah, only thing I do want to touch on in that inning is Luis Lara again. There's a pretty good camera angle on the Brewers broadcast, and then I actually saw it on the Cardinals broadcast too, of him cutting the bases on Bryce Terang's RBI double when he scored from first on a ball that didn't get to the warning track. He was flying, but he was also really taking good angles, and he had another one in the next game where he went first to third, I think, on just like really cut the bases well. And that's one of those things that on minor league broadcasts you don't hardly ever see, because quite frankly, they have like 3 cameras going and they're all kind of focused on the ball all at once. So that's one thing. It's just kind of hard to tell. He looked like he knew what he was doing more than just speed wise on the bases though. And like I wrote about what to expect on Fanatic. I think some of the base stealing might not go super well early. I think some of the jumps he gets and everything aren't great. He was very successful in AA last year. It was like 86% success rate. I think it was 77 in AAA this year. So that's still not terrible, but normally 80% is kind of where you're looking to be, that or above. And in AAA, you'd expect it to probably be a little bit more difficult in MLB than it was in AAA. So we'll see how it goes on that front. But in terms of actually just reading the ball off the bat and then just cutting the bases, like with his speed, I think he's going to add some more value in that way too. And you mentioned him calling for the ball, but just the general energy he was showing right away. I think that's always fun to see when a guy comes up, and when he scored on Terang double, he was very pumped up and very excited about the hit and the run scoring, and generally seemed to just be very excited about helping the team win. Just in all of his answers, it was cool to hear from a young guy about every single answer that he gave in interviews was just talking about how he wanted to kind of impact the game and help the team win. And I think that's something the Brewers do a very good job of preaching in the lower levels and in the minors at a degree that maybe not every team does, because quite frankly, when you're in high A, like winning isn't your number one priority. Your number one priority is getting better, moving up, trying to get to that next level, trying to take the next step. But I think the Brewers do a good job of balancing, like, yes, that is your main focus, but we also want you to learn how to do these little things that will help the team win when you get to the highest level, because that's what they're going to care about most when you get to MLB is, can you do the little things? Can you help them win? So just the fact that he had that understanding, or at least knew that he should be saying it in post game and in any interviews, like, it was good awareness. It was also just nice to hear from a guy who's very young and just making his big league debut and had a lot of successful plays and at bats, and looked very confident in the box. But then when any time he was asked a question about anything, it was all coming back to just helping the team, which I think is usually a pretty good sign for a young player.
Game 3 is the only game that the Brewers did not win in this series, or I should say game 4. Game 3 of games, game 4 of the 5 games. Milwaukee losing this one 5-1. Like we mentioned, it was an iffy day for Kyle Harrison, who then left the game, and then the Brewers revealed some of that elbow soreness. The only run that Milwaukee put up in this one as well was a Cooper Pratt sac fly in the 7th, so not a lot to talk about here. And then game 5, an 8-4 win for the Brewers on Thursday night to close out the series. Logan Henderson returned from the IL and made his start. Looked pretty solid for the most part. The 3 earned runs is a little bit misleading because he came back out for the 6th, and you could tell things started to kind of get away from him a little bit. Put 2 guys on, and then Chad Patrick giving up a 3-run home run, driving in both of those guys who reached on a hit by pitch and then a walk. 5 1/3 for Henderson, 3 hits, 1 walk, that hit by pitch, 4 strikeouts, 3 earned runs. Pitch mix was a little different in this one. We know they had been leaning toward the cutter more against righties, but they leaned on it even more in this one, which I don't mind. Again, knowing that the Cardinals seem to do a pretty good job getting to those upshoot fastballs. I think he only had like 1, maybe 2 four-seam whiffs in this entire start. They put it in play a few times early, and they hit it pretty hard. So I think that was the right call to lean on the cutter a little bit more. It's been a little bit of a way for him to kind of balance out that arsenal a little bit. We had talked about it before about how even if it was maybe never going to be a great pitch on its own, if there was a pitch that had the potential to be the most usable third pitch, it probably was that one. So saw him use it a lot in this game. Didn't miss a ton of bats. The changeup got a lot of whiffs when he did use it. If we're going to complain about the Walker cutter and some of the pitch calling in the Miz start, the one sequence that I circled from this one that I liked was Alec Burleson's first at bat, where he only saw changeups and kept whiffing at it, so they kept throwing changeups. More of that. That's how it should work, in my opinion. That was good. Got to go both ways here if we're going to make this a frequent point of discussion. But all in all, a lot of encouraging signs from Logan Henderson in this one.
Yeah. I would honestly say I thought William did a good job for just the majority of the Henderson start. As you said, like the fastball is the type of fastball that the Cardinals have shown they can hit. And I think back to even last time the Brewers saw the Cardinals, and Kyle Harrison had a good start, but the strikeouts weren't there. He wasn't getting the whiffs on the four seam. Like I think this is legitimately something that their offense just does a much better job with than other teams, at least in terms of making contact. I don't know that they're necessarily driving them very often, but they're not really willing to make it the pitch that they're just going to go down swinging on. So when a guy throws 103, it's a little bit harder. So Miz is the one guy who can still do it to them. But I think they made the right choice going to the cutters. And like you said, being willing to double up on the double or triple up on the changeup at times. I thought he did a good job with Henderson, and Henderson did a good job coming back in his first start. And until he was pretty clearly at the end of his rope there when he came back out for the 6th, I thought he pitched well, just generally.
On the offensive side for the Brewers, Sal Frelick, Cooper Pratt had RBI singles in the 2nd to get some things going. Jake Bauers hit a 3-run homer in the 3rd. And then after that, Jordan Walker 3-run homer against Chad Patrick. Bryce Terang answered with a solo homer of his own to really keep the momentum on the Brewers' side. Jackson Chourio then contributing to the final run with some nice base running, a nice tag up from him, then a nice slide into home plate to drive in that final run, or to score that final run, I should say, an 8-4 win for the Brewers to close out a very successful 5 games in St. Louis. That felt like a long series. When I was putting this together, I didn't even realize that the Arizona road trip was not that long ago, because it feels like it's been a couple weeks since then. But the Brewers are getting closer and closer to the All-Star break. We'll have a little bit of break and game recaps. We will still be here next week, though, to talk about not only the upcoming series in Pittsburgh over the weekend. Spencer, I know you're going to be doing some of your own draft content, but I'm sure we'll have a little bit mixed in to next week's show as well. There is no minor league sandbox this week, because that was basically what the draft preview portion of the show was. I'm going to give you the floor for a minute here, though, just to remind people again, I know you talked about it during the draft segment, but just where they can find what you're working on over the next couple days.
Yeah, well, I am planning to put out an actual draft big board on it. I'll tweet out all of it, and it'll also be on. It's going to be free for everyone, so it's not going to be anything anyone needs to pay for. It's just going to be out there. Anyone can access it. But then I'll have, like, after the draft, during the draft even, I'm going to be writing up all of the picks for Brewer Fanatic on day 2 especially. I'm going to try and do some of day 1, but I will be on Jamie Cameron's stream for the day 1 draft picks, Destination the Show on YouTube. I will be writing all of them up on Patreon at Backfield Brew as well, and that will be more of the Fanatic ones are obviously going to be more like broad and not necessarily my own strict opinions on it. It's just going to be more of a write-up on what they got, what people say about them. And then on Backfield Brew, it'll be more my legitimate opinions on them, what I see in them, what I think they're going to be. That'll all be on Backfield Brew as well. And then, yeah, next week we'll have some time to recap, so I'm sure we're going to.
A lot of stuff coming up here, even if the schedule is going to slow down momentarily. We'll have all that next week on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. In the meantime, thank you for listening.